Welcome to the Man Rules Podcast. If you're looking to live with more intention, build connection, and live a more authentic, meaningful life, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dan Griffin. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that they keep changing the rules for us men without telling us. So each week, I just throw out the rule book and cover the tough topics about the real issues that men face. At the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what kind of man you're supposed to be. I'm here to help you make your own rules and become the kind of man you want to be. So let's jump in.
Hey everybody, it's Dan Griffin, Man Rules Podcast. Thanks so much for being a listener. We're excited to let you know that we are launching a free online course called Can You Relate? It's through our new school on Teachable called A Man's Way. You can sign up for the school, sign up for the course. It's all free. And you can find it at amansway.teachable.com. And that's a-mans-way.teachable.com. This is a course that I've designed specifically short to help you explore some of those man rules and some of those ideas about relationships that might be getting in the way for you to get some added clarity and some new skills for you to navigate your relationships in a more effective way.
Welcome back to another episode of the Man Rules Podcast. And this is our deep dive edition. And not only is it our deep dive edition, but this is for the month of May where we're celebrating 1 year of the Man Rules Podcast. And I'm really, really excited about that. Really, really grateful for all our listeners and the continued growth of the podcast. And our next guest, Rick Belden, is no stranger to the Man Rules Podcast. He's had some of the most popular episodes that we did last year. I certainly have been moved by the conversations that he and I had, and so he's my guest today. And the deep dive idea is that this is really going to be two men, nothing off limits, having a conversation with one another, much less of an interview, much more of an intimate conversation around our journeys, where I invite him to ask as many questions of me as well. So we're just going to see where it goes. We hope you enjoy it. And Rick, welcome.
Hi, Dan. It's good to be on with you again, and it's good to talk to you again. I always enjoy our conversations.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Me too. Let's start where we start, which is the beginning in some ways. Why did you start doing this work?
Well, I reached a point in my life, and I'm trying to think back. I think I was probably around 28 years old, at which I became so miserable with the way that my life was going that I decided that it was time to look for some help to try to sort things out. I was about 3 years out of college. I was in a professional career path in information technology that was not satisfying to me. I was not having the kind of intimate relationships that I had hoped to have. Some of my friends were starting to get married, so the old friendship party trip was coming to an end, and I had just a lot of pain from my childhood, my family of origin. And I had a breakup around Thanksgiving of whatever year that was, 1986, I think. It was so devastating to me that I was, as I said, I felt so miserable, and just the weight of my life felt so heavy at that point that I decided that if I didn't feel better by after the first of the next year, that I was going to open up to the possibility of trying to get somebody to help me. And interestingly enough, as these things often go, I happened in January or February of the next year upon an interview with a guy who was local at the time named John Lee, who was involved in men's work.
And we just had on the podcast.
That's right. I thought you did. Yeah. It was an interview with him about his work and his life. And he was just getting started at that point. He was actually still working out of his house. I read that and I thought, wow, this really sounds like my story. And this sounds like somebody who's a little bit farther along and might be able to help me. And I remember I was sent on a business trip out to the West Coast for a couple of days. after that. And on the plane ride home, I thought, okay, what is the thing that would stop me from doing this? Why would I not contact him? And I realized it was the family prohibition of taking family business to outside people, and also the family prohibition of not going to counselors because that meant something was seriously wrong with you and you were weak and you couldn't handle your own shit. So I thought, okay, I'm aware of all that and I still feel terrible enough to do it. And I got in contact with John, started doing some individual work with him, started doing men's groups with him, and that's how it all began.
So it seems that so many of us, we come to this because, and this is men, women, this is anybody, come to this because something has gone wrong in our lives. Something has created a significant amount of pain that we find ourselves willing to ask for help. And I think for men, I mean, we can be really down on our knees, the skin worn away, far, we're on our knee bones, kneecaps, with all the skin worn away, and we still may not ask for help. But I'm gonna guess something, and you tell me if this is right. And I don't know that this means anything per se, but I'm gonna guess that even as a child, you were always more of a gentle spirit, had more of a poet's heart.
Yeah, I think that's true. It can be a little tricky to self-evaluate sometimes, but I think that's true. In retrospect, I would say that I noticed maybe more things around me than other kids did, and I took things in more deeply. And certainly when things happened that were painful, they felt extremely significant to me, particularly if they happened iteratively over a long period of time. And I remember as a child observing the way people behaved around me, people in the family and, people at school, other kids, and just wondering, why are they acting like that? Why would it even occur to them to behave that way? Because I saw so much hurtful behavior directed toward other people and actually directed toward themselves. And I guess I tended to be thoughtful, and it seemed to me that it shouldn't be so hard for people to be better to each other, but it seemed like a lot of people weren't able to do it for some reason.
Yeah, and part of why I said that was my own projection, in the sense of, and God knows it doesn't take much to crush those hearts, especially I think with boys. And so I've had to deal with the fallout of that, which has been to become at times that which I detested. That's almost another piece of all of this.
And I guess, Dan, if I have one thought that occurs to me too, is that I was never taught how to be an adult. I wasn't prepared for the adult world. And so as I reached the end of my 20s, I was running out of all the coping strategies and all the pretend adult habits that I had available to me. And there was a real feeling of desperation, like I really don't know how to do anything at this age that it seems like I ought to know how to do.
Well, there's a lot of people that have that experience, and it doesn't propel them to get help. It propels them to, button down the hatches more and kind of reinforce more. I mean, don't you think you work with a lot of people, and you've worked, really in deep ways with a lot of men. Don't you think there's just a lot of men, they're walking around 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're as lost as you describe yourself, may not even know it, but their feeling of being lost, it just continues because there's no recourse.
Yeah, no recourse is a good point, because a lot of people get nailed down early, and that changes the situation. I mean, if I'd been married, if I'd had children, if I'd had a lot of external attachments like that, I wouldn't have had the option to dig in the way that I did. And I've always been pretty mindful of that. And I understand that a lot of people out there are in situations where they don't have the latitude that I did as a single person that had a decent income, even though I was doing something I didn't like. But I'm also very, very idealistic. And I've always, I guess rock bottom for me has always been, I deserve better than this. So no matter how miserable I was just still convinced that I deserved better and that I could do better for myself. And, I don't know to what extent that's operative in everybody else.
So you were working with John Lee. You start to discover that there's this path, this opportunity to not only take a deep look at your pain, but take a deep look at your pain as a man, which obviously I think is different. You know, you weren't prepared to be an adult, and that's true, but you also weren't prepared, I'm guessing, to be a man. Actually, I know that to be the case from our previous conversations. Why did you keep going? Why did you keep coming back to that help?
Well, I saw changes in my life pretty quickly. Within, well, I'm trying to think this through, Dan, and it's like probably within 3 months, I actually started dating someone, and it was better than anything I'd experienced before. And I was so raw from the last one that I thought it could be years. And I started this new relationship, and it was over very quickly, and it didn't end very well. But I also noticed that I was more open, and there were more opportunities for me to engage with women that I didn't expect. And I also, I left my job within a few months and actually started doing contract tech work, which again was a huge change. I felt more independent. Those jobs weren't necessarily a whole lot better than what I left, but it was certainly a progression away from feeling trapped for me. So that's the long answer. And also I began to feel better about myself. I began to develop a better understanding of myself. And once I started attending groups with other men that John was running with his partner, Dan Jones, at the time, I started to hear other men's stories. And I started to realize that I was not just some weird space alien who was unhappy for some sort of esoteric reasons. I heard other men talk about their backgrounds and about their inner lives and their emotional lives and things that frustrated them and made them feel trapped. And all of a sudden I felt like, wow, this is actually something that other people share. And hearing other people talk about their situations just put mine in a whole different perspective, where I started to feel like I wasn't just off, away somewhere else in the galaxy from all the other humans. I started to realize that I'm actually having a life that has parallels and similar processes and experience with other people, and it helped me feel closer to myself.
So, so much of this work is about men being able to share their inner conversations, the conversations that we don't think either anybody else has, or that if we share them will look weak. And of course, it's that internalization of the man rules that just is constantly swirling around inside of us. How much did the internalization and all those man rules, how much did that kind of inhibit your work, and how much did it help your work?
Well, initially, it was very difficult to open up with a stranger, John Lee in this case, and talk about what was happening with me. And he would frequently kind of gently challenge me on my emotional state. So for example, I think the thing that comes up for me, probably that I remember the best because I saw it in other men too, Dan, was John would ask the question, "What do you need right now?" And I could not answer it. I had no idea or no even method for checking in with myself to know the answer to that question, where if somebody actually was interested and asked me right in this moment, "What do you need from me?" I would just turn into a statue. I had no idea. And I saw a lot of other men do that in groups too. And I think that's one of the, if you want to talk about man rules, one of those rules is I don't need anything from anybody, especially if you come from a dysfunctional family situation like I did. I don't need anybody to do anything for me. I don't need anything from anybody. And if somebody asks me what I need from them, I don't have an answer, because that's a question that I've never had to answer before from somebody who is sincerely interested.
But at some level, you had to have been quite conflicted, because at some level you knew you needed a lot, or you knew that something was desperately missing that you couldn't give yourself, didn't you?
Yeah, but I couldn't put a name to it. I just knew I felt that need, and I felt that need, all those needs not being addressed, but I had no vocabulary to articulate what they were, even to myself. All I could say was, I feel bad, I feel sad, I feel depressed. And John would say, "Well, do you feel angry?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not angry." That's ridiculous. Of course I'm not angry. Well, I was massively angry. But again, as a man, for me, I didn't feel, I was terrified of that anger, terrified of my sadness. Grief, I didn't even know what that word actually meant in terms of anything that I felt. So I think a lot of it has to do with emotional and psychological vocabulary, at least for me, where I recognize those words as being part of the English language, but I either didn't know what they meant in my personal terms, or again, the anger thing was like the tip. That was the very beginning when I was able to learn how to safely access and express some of that, because everything else was locked up behind it. And I really, I'd spent my mom would always tell me, oh, you're very relaxed and, you're very easygoing and all this stuff. And inside there was just a, complete turmoil going on. But I had learned to hide it even from myself. And I think in some part I knew that it was terrifying because there was the angry energy that I had was so massive that, and I knew I didn't know how to get to it safely. So I didn't want to know about it and I would deny it.
And, John's work is really brilliant in that way. And I, just had him on the podcast to talk specifically. We spent the whole time talking just about men's anger. And he shared that idea that, there are the ones who externalize and the ones who internalize. And, sometimes the ones who internalize are the most dangerous, but also suffer the most because nobody can see it. And it's kind of like, if you spend your life trying to be a nice guy, trying to be a guy who doesn't get angry, like how do you even get in touch with it? Because you just tell yourself, I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not going to be like this other person in my life who was angry, is usually what it comes down to, is that, we're trying to avoid being that guy or woman. So what did you do? I mean, so you didn't have a language for this internal world. You start to find some movement. You find a man that you trust, that you begin to trust. You're in enough pain, and then you find a man that you begin to trust. So those are critical steps for anybody listening. The question is, like, how much pain is too much pain? At what point can you just say, you know what? I'm in some pain. I'm suffering. I've got some questions about how to live my life. I'm going to try to get some help. So there's that. But then you find a man you trust. So then what's next?
I think one of the key steps as we're talking about this that I began to learn with John was to be able to be aware of what my inner states were and to be able to articulate that. And then also to start to understand that I was actually making choices all the time. One of the things John was really good about was, and I'm going to paraphrase him and perhaps badly, but I remember at several points I was still doing a lot of drinking, and I was smoking pot, and I was going to hookers and doing all this stuff. And that was a problem for me. I didn't want to be doing those things, but I wasn't ready to quit. And my remembrance with John was like, well, the main thing is to understand as best you can and be aware of why you're making those choices. What does it give you? What does it cost you? And once you're clear with that, and if you feel okay with all of that, then, continue. But if you find that you're not okay with that, then you have a better understanding and a better motivation to begin to do something else instead. And I think that's an important part, is when you start to learn that you can do something else instead, rather than just, I guess my typical method was, I'm just going to stop doing fill in the blank, and then I'll just sit there and suffer until I don't want to do it anymore. And sometimes that works. But for me, the whole general process was one of developing a greater awareness of what was happening in myself from moment to moment, and realizing that I didn't have to just kind of be on automatic all the time.
So what was the hardest part for you about the work? And I want to find out what's the hardest part now, but I want to start with what was the hardest part for you about continuing to do the work?
The hardest part for me was, a couple of things. Number one, I felt ashamed. there was a lot of shame initially that I was a failure because I couldn't figure out and manage my own life, and that I had to go talk to somebody else about it. And also, it was a massive revolution against the family system that I was raised in. I had moved away from my hometown when I was 19 years old. I had moved from northern New York to Houston, Texas, and then Austin. I had moved, I guess it's close to 2,000 miles away, and I thought that would be enough. But it wasn't, Dan. As you know, we have our external family and we have our internalized family that we carry around with us. And there was just a lot of resistance within my family system, and it only got worse the farther I went, because then I started to want to challenge people and say, hey, I don't think I'm being treated right here. Or, hey, I don't think that this relationship is going very well, and I'd like to improve it. And the amount of pushback and the amount of antagonism that I received was very difficult for me, especially for the first few years. There was always a feeling of betrayal, or a sort of a conditioned sort of belief that I was betraying the family by even talking about the things that happened, in the family outside the house. And so that was a really big challenge.
What about other men? How did you find other men receiving the work? I mean, was it kind of like a secret in how you interacted with other men that weren't a part of the work? Or, how did that show up? I know a lot of our listeners are kind of like, I might get some help, I might go to it, but I don't want anybody else to know about it.
Yeah, I can't. It's interesting. It's been long enough now that I have to think a little bit, but I'm certain that I didn't tell anybody that I was doing it, probably for the first couple of months. And then I started to get so excited about the results that I was seeing in my life that I had a couple of friends who I worked with who were having difficulties. I think for men, a lot of the time it's relationship stuff. It's stuff with women that'll drive them in. And both of these guys, one guy was going through a really bad divorce, and the other guy just had one relationship after another that just failed. And I started to talk with them. I said, it doesn't have to be like that. I know this guy, and he does these men's groups. And of course, they were both like, I don't know. And so I got them involved. And through the groups, I met a couple other men that became good friends with me. And there was a little boom here in Austin for a couple of years as a result of what John Lee was doing. A lot of guys,
there sure was.
Yeah, a lot of guys got excited about it, and he opened the Austin Men's Center, and he had all kinds of counseling groups and activities there. And it spiked, and then it kind of dropped, and then he started to travel and stuff. So it didn't last as long as I would have liked it to, but there was a good community there for a good couple of years. And that's how I made a lot of linkages and connections, and developed some interactions that lasted long after that. But some of it, as I said, was guys I knew from work that I managed to encourage to get in there. And so everything kind of blossomed from that.
So we're talking like more than 20 years you've been doing this work. You've been being, as I like to talk about it, very consciously living your life. You've really cultivated a sense of a conscious masculinity for yourself and what that looks like for you. What's the hardest part about doing the work now?
Oh boy. Well, I've said this to someone else recently. When I first started, what motivated me was a list of 3 or 4 things that I wanted to have in my life, or I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to be doing work that I really loved for its own sake. I wanted to have a successful relationship, long-term relationship with a woman. I was having some health problems, and I wanted to resolve those. And I wanted to repair my relationships in my family of origin so that they would all be functional and healthy, although I wasn't using those words at the time. And if I look at my life, I can see that I've been partially successful at best and not successful at all with some of those things. But the thing that I learned, that I came to realize over time, was that the thing I really needed the most, that I didn't know I needed, was to improve my relationship with myself. And that I feel is just an unqualified success. So I guess if anything kind of dogs me at this point in terms of staying with it, it's that nagging feeling that all those sort of external goals that I had in mind are still, they're still evading me in some fashion to one extent or another. And, there have been times through the years when I felt like, well, why am I working so hard if I'm not getting the things that I set out to get? And as I said, the kind of counterbalance to that is that I got something I really needed that I didn't know I needed that really is the precedent for all of those things.
Some men listening to this might be like, well, fuck that, man. 20 years? Are you kidding me? Like, why aren't you done, dude? Like, why aren't you fixed? Like, I mean, isn't this like a year or two process? You figure out what are the answers, you make the changes, and bada boom, bada bing, we're done.
It depends on the person, because I've known plenty of guys that went into a crisis period and they dipped into this kind of work for a year or two, and then they had done what they needed to do to function at the level of happiness and capability and everything else that they're satisfied with, and they just kept on going. I've known other guys that kind of dip in and out at various points because things come up. I think a lot of it has to do with your personality and the kind of circumstances, well, your personality in combination with the kind of circumstances that you came out of. In other words, like in my case, my family, parents, the whole childhood situation was very deficient in terms of what I needed. And beyond deficient, it was very damaging in some very deep ways. And so I did not set out to spend, this much time doing this kind of work, but things have continued to come up and demanded attention, and I have felt confident that it was better to give them attention than to turn away from them. And quite honestly, I don't think I would have lived this long if I hadn't done something about this stuff. So those are reasons enough for me to continue.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been around men who have been doing this work a long time, and very, very grounded men, and spiritual, and I think part of it is as our lives continue to grow and expand, we get all these new experiences and these new opportunities to grow, and and then we've still got to develop like these skills, or what I find at this point, and I don't hold myself out as the great model for this work at all, but what I've found is, as a father, as a husband, as a professional, like I've had to navigate some really, really challenging stuff in the last 5 years. And a lot of it has had to do with getting some of the things that I always thought, I wanted, or all of that. But like the work has deepened for me. Like I can't imagine trying to navigate everything I've navigated in the past 5 years without the incredible support that I've gotten from men and women, but really from a lot of men who have taken me, under their wings, who have guided me, who have been surrogate fathers, who have held me accountable. For men listening who are skeptical, I would say, like, you have no idea where the journey is going to take you. And part of the man rules is the checklist. Give me the checklist. Let me treat my life like a car.
Right. Yeah.
Let me take my car into the shop. You tell me what's wrong. I pay for it. It's fixed. And now let's just drive on.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to float a theory here too about this, which just occurred to me, which is that in general terms, we live in a culture and a social structure that puts a premium on basically staying half asleep and not paying attention to a lot of things that actually matter in a human life. And I guess I feel like one of the reasons that it's been necessary for me to kind of dig in and work on those sort of things actively is because I'm in a cultural system that tends to push me away from that stuff. I just wonder if we were in a different sort of culture where awareness, self-awareness, and the things we've been talking about, emotional awareness and vocabulary, if that was encouraged in everybody, then I suspect it wouldn't be so necessary for some of us to put so much time and effort into it for ourselves.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? That the default is away from that, and so it's like pushing against the river in some ways.
Yeah, that's what kind of came to me in that moment of like,
So that,
if
you
the
know, that
default
makes
was,
sense.
if the default, yeah.
And I mean, don't do you ever do you ever look at some of these folks though, and look at them on the outside and look at their lives and say like, man, I feel like I'm working so hard to to go through the day, not like, oh, I can't believe it, but just like being aware and practicing emotional sensitivity and relational competence and how I show up. Do, do these other people, like, it seems to be effortless for them? Am I missing something?
Yeah, I've had that experience a lot, and particularly as I turned 60 a couple months ago, and I look back and I think, boy,
Happy birthday.
yeah, thanks. I look back and I think, man, if you could have sucked it up and just stayed in that cubicle, you'd be retired now. You'd be in a whole different situation. You can do what you want. And a lot of people, that's the approach a lot of people take. That's the deal a lot of people take. That's the bargain they make with themselves and with the world. Uh, for whatever reason, I wasn't able to do it. It was so important for me to find myself and recover myself and and find some way to be authentically who I was, at least within myself, that I was willing to sacrifice a lot. And I have sacrificed a lot. But I do feel sometimes that's when you talk about difficulty, sometimes I look around and I go, geez, it seems like everybody else is like doing better than I am here externally. And why did I get stuck with this path? But again, it depends upon, if you start way back like I did, it's going to take some time to catch up and remediate some things. And a lot of it is repatterning, Dan. A lot of it is repatterning how I see myself, how I see other people, my perceptions, my beliefs, my habits, my ways of evaluating things, my language. And it takes a long time. And again, some people seem to be able to get by pretty well with whatever they got coming out of childhood, and they make their mistakes, but they just kind of manage to, they just kind of rock and roll their way through it. That just didn't work for me.
And so the key is to be able to recognize that without judgment and without that judgment about your masculinity. And, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody gets to have their own path. But I have no question that you have helped a lot of men because you do speak openly about your experiences, because you do challenge that social model about men, either having all the answers or not asking for help, and really being a voice of that. How has this impacted your relationships? You identify as heterosexual. Talk to me about intimacy and love and sex. I mean, let's go there.
Well, that's still a work in progress for me. I have gone through, I've had extended relationships earlier in my life, and I went through a long period where I didn't have any relationships at all. I reached a point where I just felt like I keep having the same kind of failures over and over and over again. And there's something in me that's got to change here, and I want to get down and find out what it is. And so at this point in my life, I'm re-entering relationship territory, and I am finding in my current relationship that my capacity to be present with myself, to be present with her, to recognize when I'm getting into a pattern of behavior or feeling or thought that has been unproductive in the past, that I don't have to do that anymore, and to come back quickly and try to resolve things with her. And Dan, Dan, I didn't know this, but I was so passive aggressive when I was younger. I didn't even know it. And I didn't see the ways that I could be difficult for another person to deal with, and how things might be misinterpreted. So I guess the best answer I have to your question right now is, as I said, it's a work in progress, but I feel optimistic really for the first time in I don't know, 15 or 20 years right now, that it is going to be possible for me to have a successful, intimate relationship with someone because of the experience that I'm having right now.
Do you think your expectations have been too high of your partners, or do you think that there's been something else getting in the way from you?
I think I think expectations have been high in terms of too high in terms of believing that somebody should just understand what's going on with me without me being able to articulate it. I have this. I'm kind of handicapped by this tendency to think that everybody operates the same way I do, and so
Man rule.
yeah, exactly. It's like, well, isn't it obvious that such and such, because of the way I said that or the way I behaved or whatever, and so that has been a problem. My inability and lack of skill in, and this is something we talked about during the Mother Wound show, Dan. It's like I'm still trying to unlearn that business of forgetting that I have needs, of putting the other person's needs first and not articulating mine until I feel like I'm backed in a corner. And, then I come out swinging and basically say, why did you back me into a corner? Don't you know that I need this and this and this? And it's like, the other person's like, I didn't know that. You never said anything about that. I thought everything was fine. So I've been hampered in the past a lot by that, a lot by being unaware of my needs, feeling like it wasn't okay to have them, to articulate them. I've been terrible in the past with boundaries, and all that stuff for me has led up to being in a state of resentment toward the other person, as if they've been stealing from me or something. And the inability to set boundaries and be clear with them and keep them. I felt like I didn't have the right to do that. So a lot of bad habits that in some sense have wound up, really the bottom line is not being honest, thinking that I was being honest, but actually not having a blind spot around some of the most important things that you need to be honest about with somebody, which is, this is my limit. I need time for this. This is how much I can give you today, all that kind of stuff. And also, this is what I need from you. This is the first time I've really felt like I'm actually being somewhat successful, somewhat consistently better than I ever had before with things like that. Dance,
I mean, what man listening to this podcast can honestly say he was taught any of that?
Yeah.
Can honestly say that he was modeled any of that? Now, maybe some of our younger listeners, maybe they had fathers like you who were aware. I mean, there are enough men who've been doing this work for long enough that their kids are now 20, 30 years old. And so they've seen some of that. But even for a lot of those guys, I mean, the patterns that we're carrying into our relationships and all of that. I mean, so part of me is saying, like, I just be easy on yourself, because you came by it very, very honestly. And it's heartbreaking how much it does hurt our relationships and how much it affects us. But, one of the things when I talk about the water, what I always try to point out to people is like, look, you take the man rules and you take everything that men are expected to do in relationships and you put them next to each other, it's a shit show.
Yeah.
I mean, they're diametrically opposed to each other. Don't be vulnerable, be vulnerable. Don't share your feelings, share your feelings. Be angry and use power to get what you want, compromise. And the list goes on. They're at odds with each other. What hope do men have? My God.
Yeah. And it's like, as we're talking right now, I'm thinking about the generation. Like I said, I'm 60 now. So the generation that I grew up with, and I grew up in a factory town. So my dad worked rotating shifts, which are just a great way to destroy a person. They did that 8 to 4, 4 to 12, 12 to 8, and every week he changed. which is just awful. It's horrible for you physiologically. It's horrible for you psychologically. Every day he went into work, he went into a building that, for when it was built 25 years ago, they put the roof on it and no sunlight ever went in there since then. It was horrible. And the sort of, I guess the kind of cultural mythology is in some circles, that my mom had a terrible time of it because she was a housewife and she was at home and she wasn't able to make her own money and be independent and all that stuff, which is all true. But my father's life was a life of sacrifice and putting his needs aside every single day to support the family. And so I think there's an element in me of that, although my life is very different. But I saw a model of manhood, which was that you put your needs aside for your wife, your children, for everybody else, and you do that on a consistent basis every day for so long that you don't really get any opportunity to say, I wish I had something different.
So there's no question, like, this is hard work, and it can feel lonely at times. It can really make somebody question the benefit of it. It brings up a lot of pain, so sometimes it's hard to even judge that there's been any progress. So to end our journey together, our conversation together, and I just want to thank you again for being a part of this. Like, let's end on the high note. What are the gifts that you've gotten from doing this work? What have you learned from doing this work that you just would never have imagined?
Well, the first thing is something I mentioned earlier, which is that I didn't know that I had a terrible relationship with myself. I didn't know that the majority of the misery that I felt in life was self-inflicted. I didn't know how absolutely brutal and cruel and unrelenting I was with myself. And as a result of doing this work in the way that I've done it for as long as I've done it, that's more of a fleeting sort of situation with me now. And I see that in myself when it happens. I still have a tendency, if I get triggered, to go down into a shame spiral and I'm stupid, I'm an idiot, I'm a failure, and all this stuff. But the length of time that I spend in it is so much shorter, and I can observe it happening, and I have a pretty good idea of what I need to do to get out of it. So I'd rather not have those experiences at all. But to the extent that I have them now, they're limited. I mean, Dan, I'd go into when I was, before I started all this stuff, before I, began anything, if I went down into that space, that dark space, I might be down in there for months at a time. And so the relationship with myself, which is not the thing that I thought I needed to address, that's the number one gain that I've had. I feel more at ease with myself. I feel happier and more comfortable with myself, regardless of what's going on. And, you go through life long enough, some bad things are going to happen. And you really need yourself at those times, no matter how many other people are around. I guess the other thing I would say is that, I was able to reopen my creative life. I've been very creative as a child, and I had shut it down during my teenage years. And at various points, as I've been doing this work that we're talking about, it has reignited and it has resurfaced in my life in some very vibrant, very life-affirming, very life-giving ways. And I have all those things, all those artifacts that I've created, and all the experiences of having created them, which have been a big part of my life, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I guess the last thing is, again, getting older, I've found myself thinking, well, what's going to satisfy me at the end of my life? And I think that for me, it became important that there were some things that I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave hanging. That were important to me, and doing this work has enabled me to address a lot of those things. There's still some more to go, but our time here is limited, and we do have to make choices about how we spend it. And at some point, it's going to end. And for me, it's been important to look at my life and go, okay, have I lived my life in a way that feels like I've maximized the opportunity that life gives me? And have I done it in a way that feels like there's some integrity to it. And, do I feel like I gave it the best I had? And I can say that I think I have.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the work you're doing. And something I said in the teasers for this podcast when I was first kicking it off was, look, if you're coming to this podcast looking to get laid more or looking to make more money, this is not the podcast for you. And I would say the same thing about the work that you do and the work that you represent is, you may find yourself having a lot more sex. You may find yourself making more money, but really it's an inside job. And it's about being able to walk through your day with some genuine sense of groundedness and confidence in who you are, and not the mask or the persona that you've been living out because you think that's it. That's all you got.
Yeah, and I would add one other thing too that occurred to me as you were talking, which is that, growing up the way I did, I just was filled with this sense of urgency that I didn't want anybody else to have to go through anything like I experienced as a child. Now that's not realistic in this world. I'm not. I had to grow out of that idea that I was going to fix everybody and fix everything so it never happened again. But it was important to me that other people gain some value and gain some benefit from my experience and the processes that I've been engaged in to address it. And that is something else that's to me is just priceless. That other people, as you said, other people have benefited, and other people have gained value from my sharing of my experience and my ability to shed some light on some of these things. And and I paid a high cost for it, in terms of family rejection that is still ongoing. To me, I had to get myself back, Dan. It's just like I didn't know I didn't know I was going in, to rescue myself and to get myself back and recover myself. But that's what it was really all about in the end. I don't know that I would have even understood what that meant going in. I needed some external motivations and the internal misery in combination to get me going. But I don't know. I have my regrets. That's bound to happen, at this age, about things I didn't do or things I could have done or things I could have and don't have. But on the whole, I don't think there was anything more important in my life to do than to recover myself so that I would not walk through my entire life being a stranger to who I was.
Mm. And I think some people are more, they're more disposed toward that part of the path. And I just want to be really, really clear to anybody who's listening. The majority of people who are listening to this podcast, they're already leaning toward some journey of self-discovery and self-awareness. But irrespective of where you are, this isn't about good and bad or better than. It's just these are some opportunities. These are options for you if you're living that life of quiet desperation. If you're one of those people that feels like you're constantly digging from an empty well, or that you're always kind of looking for something else to make you feel better and make you feel adequate as a man. What Rick's been talking about, this is the opportunity that you have to step outside of that and begin to see what else might be there. And I think that's the essence of it is nobody's better than anybody else. It's just some people gravitate more toward a different journey than others. So
yeah, Dan, I would also like to add one last thing in kind of piggybacking on what you just said, which is that every individual gets to choose. Everybody gets to decide, do they want to do this kind of work? Is it worth it to them? And if they do, how far do I want to go? How much do I want to put into it? How much is enough? I think the main message I have for people is not everybody should do what I did, because I don't believe that. And I don't believe it's necessary for everybody to do what I did. But if you're not satisfied with your life and you'd like it to be better, you do have options, and it can be better. And you don't have to just settle for whatever you've got and say to yourself, well, I'm kind of miserable, but I don't think there are really any ways to do anything about it. So I'll just keep on going.
So, Rick, what's the best way for people to learn more about you and get connected to you?
Yeah, Dan, I have a coaching practice for men, and I'm also working with women now as well. You can go to my website, which is rickbeldencoaching.com.
As always, Rick, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Dan. Always great to visit with you. It goes by super fast every time.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to think that's a good sign.
Well, I'd love to talk to you again because it always goes well.
Yep, and absolutely, we'll have you back. We still got some conversations that we're wanting to have. So this is the beginning of year 2. So don't worry about that. We'll be connecting again. And so I want to thank Rick for a great conversation, for a deeper dive into this experience, this journey. So I just want to thank all of our listeners for being a part of this first year. You've honored me with your commitment and your engagement. I'm so excited about what we're going to be able to do in the coming year. And as always, I wish you a wonderful, wonderful week. And I encourage you to live your life more consciously and to let of any need to do it perfectly. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Man Rules Podcast, where we don't let the rules rule us. If you're enjoying this podcast and our guest, please take a moment to give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you may be listening, and let others know about our podcast as well. If you have ideas for guests, topics, or even would like to be a guest, send us an email at ideas@themanrules.com. Check out our website and everything we're up to at themanrules.com. Because the only question we have to ask is what kind of man you want to be and what's keeping you from being that man.